Hi guys. Previously, I talked about temporary stacks when you're using serverless framework. So temporary stacks isn't something specific to serverless framework, but the idea is you have a AWS stack, and then instead of like deploying to a shared deployment, like a, let's say test or sandbox, a shared deployment with your teammates, and dev is a shared deployment, for instance. You deploy to a temporary stack, so service framework or your tool of choice spins up your entire stack and deploys there. And then all your testing, all your integration and end-to-end testing. I say integration testing because in this case you're testing against some real AWS resources, and end-to-end testing of your backend APIs usually, unless you're server-side rendering some HTML. That's done only towards your temporary stack. So previously I talked about that in a video, and the starting point of that was Yan Chui's school about uh, an application. It also has a very nice blog post about it here. Why you should use ephemeral environments. So ephemeral environments, temporary stack is synonymous meaning in this case. But with this setup, I had something that I couldn't make with. So let's take a look at a PR from uh, already positive, and I'll share the C positive too. So this is another workshop of Yanchi, and in this example, what we're doing is in PRs. Let's close all this so it's not distracting us. So when we have a PR, you're checking it out. You need some credentials so that the CI pipeline is able to achieve some roles and do things with it. Particularly, I'm using this Github Actions session to take advantage of all IDC provider support that GitHub added. Prior to that, I used to have to get some environment variables from my repository and then get some permissions for service framework to do things like deploy things, right? And that's kind of a security issue because attackers can see your environment variables when you expose them like this in CI. So with that configuration that we see here, and then role session and role session to assume, we are able to not need that anymore. So the CI is perfectly capable of then deploying its stack with service framework. Anyhow, so we are installing the dependencies, linting. This is a JS project, so I didn't add any type support for it, but there is linting. We are using a job to get them branch name. So what we do as a best practice is we name the temporary stack after our PR name. So after our branch name. So this job helps us get that. Once we get that, we just use that to deploy to the temporary stack. So this is how we do it in serverless framework, npm run SLS deploy, and then the name of your stack. I have some additional parameters here that are specific to this project. They don't really matter, so they're not really worth talking about it. And there's some additional utility here, a very nice utility. I really like this. So basically, what it does is once you have a deploy stack, it will, when you run this export environment plugin from serverless, it's going to populate your local.env file with all the values that your stack has. So they're different for your temporary stack, or they're different for your dev deployment. So in there, maybe like you might have, if you're using Cypress, you might have like multiple configs in your Cypress config folder, which I don't have here. And instead, what I'm doing it is I'm just getting all the environment variables and then just mapping that into my Cypress environment variable. So this way I have parity between my .m file and then cypress.env.json. And the API key for Melos are there, by the way, is uh, trial account. So it's over in a few days. So still Dolby one, doesn't matter. Um, but you can try email testing in this repository if you like to until then. Um, So then we do some jest tests, and then I also have some just end-to-end tests here. I really like comparing just end-to-end tests in this repository to Cypress, and you can take a look at those if you want. So we have some backend tests here, and we also have integration tests, which are able to be run as integration mode and HTTP mode. Something interesting Yanshu covers in his workshop, which I will attach to the description. And then we run the end-to-end test, and then that's it. Right? So what the problem I was solving was I used to have to remove the temporary stack after having deployed it and having run end-to-end tests against it. And this was nice and clean, right? Like everything, you don't have to clean your DB, no having to delete after yourself, no cleanup needed. It's great. You just clean up the stack and it's done. Uh, that's excellent, right? The only thing I was missing out was that, let's say I have a PR open and then the CI passes, the CI at the end ends up removing the stack. So now if I want to do something locally, like if I want to continue working locally, then what I have to do is I have to again deploy my branch. I have to again export my variables and then work with it. So I have to spend like 2 minutes. Sorry about this pet of mine. It knows how to escape the cage. Then I have to redo that. So to make that go away, right? Like what we would have to do is we run our PR. We don't delete the stack, but we only delete the stack after that PR is merged. So that's what I try to make work here. And if you look at it, it's somewhat similar. So we only trigger this when the pull request is closed, and it checks like this is the magic line here. It checks if this PR has been merged, and if it's merged, then we execute the removal, right? Everything here is generic, like checking out, configuring credentials, getting branch name, and installing. We have to install because we're using SLS here. But I think the gist of it is that the pull request type, it has to be closed. And then because of the CI context, it knows that the recently merged PR is closed, right? And once we can verify that, then we can run this. So I tried a PR doing this, right? And the PR, so this is, I just called it remove stack, and it ran. And so that was fine, right? And we didn't remove anything at the end. So the moment of truth is coming, right? We're gonna merge this thing, and then we'll see if this is working. So we've merged it, and we're not gonna see anything in this PR, but if you look at our actions, so we should see the merge happening to main, and then this is the job that we configured, and we got the branch name, it's installing, so it can use SLS. Let's see if it can get the branch name here. Okay, see if it can remove it. Oh my God, this pet of mine. I'm sorry about this. I don't know how it escapes the cage. Okay. So removal usually takes a minute, but it looks like it's going to work. I just want to wait for it to see if I can verify it, and I'll just pause while it's doing that. All right, so it did remove it, 48 seconds, no problem, right? But I still want to make sure, right? So I am still over at my check. I have my PR checked out, right? So I'm going to try to run the remove branch script, and this should fail because it's already removed. Beautiful. Okay, so that is how I'll post a link um, to the PR and how this is done. But if you are using temporary stacks, using GitHub Actions, and you have implemented CI/CD, you're in your PRs, you are deploying your stack, you're testing against it, doing all that. And then this allows you just to remove that stack, so you don't have to have this chore of cleaning up your temporary branches manually or with some lane job, right? So we just take care of it right here and then as we merge our PR.